Hello Year 12, welcome back to our final video for our Module A poetry study. And the final poem we will be looking at today is Home by Miriam Low. So as always, can you please make sure that you have a copy of the actual poem in front of you so that you can annotate that, and also something that you can write or type down notes with as you go, because we will be discussing this poem in class. Okay, let's jump straight into it. Obviously, we're going to start with the composer's context, and then we'll move into the actual annotations. So the composer's context here is very, very important because there's a lot of ideas and information that we need to know about the composer because it's very heavily influenced this particular text. So Miriam Low was born in Canada in 1973. She was raised in Singapore and has lived in Australia since 1993. She's a bit all over the place. She is of Chinese Malaysian descent on her father's side and Anglo-Australian on her mother's side. So what we're seeing already is she's a bit of a nomad in terms that she's moved from place to place. So there's never been one central location where she has really been. She's kind of been uplifted all around her youth. And then now that we know her heritage as well, we see that there's this beautiful mixture between Chinese, Malaysian, this Eastern, and Singapore, this Eastern upbringing, but now it's also been involved in a Western upbringing as well. So we already see this emergence of East and West kind of within this person's identity. She's married to a Baptist pastor and edits his sermons and plays piano in the church. So we've got a lot of religious ideas coming through here as well, that she's married to someone, or this Christian identity is coming through as well. So automatically we're getting this picture painted in our head about who this person is. And then throughout her poetry, she explores concepts of family, home, and heritage, which we will see as well in this poem. So that background information is super important, as I said, because it will help us understand a lot of the ideas that she is bringing to this particular text. So we'll jump right into it. So we'll start with the actual title itself, which is Home. So I'll ask you a question now as you're listening at home. No pun intended. I want you to consider, what is home for you? So if someone did ask you, oh, what does home mean for you? How would you answer that question? Because a lot of people may have different ideas about what home means. Some people may say, it's my house. It's where I live. That's my home. Some people might say it's, the country they live in, or it might be the religion in which they ascribe to, or it might be not even a physical thing. It might be something that they feel, a certain sense of who they are, or it might be a person or a group of people that they belong to. But these ideas are very much centered around the idea that home has a very strong connection to where someone belongs, and this idea of belonging. And that's going to be very, very important, and it's a pivotal part of understanding this particular poem. It's the idea that home is where one belongs, okay? As we move down a little bit, you'll notice that it says number 1, and it has a little, almost like a subtitle there in some ways. This poem is broken up into 3 parts, as you should know, because hopefully you have read it. If you have not read it, please read it now before you continue. But this is broken up into 3 different parts, and that's important because it's kind of 3 different parts of her thinking, I would describe it as, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but that's why there's a number 1 there. So we'll start with that first little subtitle there, one day I will find it. So this particular little title here is almost in reference to the title of the entire poem. It's set in future tense, so one day I will find it. And that denotes to us that she does not feel at home yet, or she has not found home. And in a sense, it's telling us that she does not belong yet, or at least she does not feel that she belongs. Okay? So I'll read out the first stanza there. So it says, I'll follow the smell of food, fried ikan bilis, roast lamb, mangoes, or the sound of water touching down on sand, stones, mud. Perhaps the code for entry will be in Braille, and I must stand in a dark room at midnight, weeping and running my fingers over 2 stone tablets. It will be in my mouth, a thin wafer of honey, the bitter salt taste of my husband's sweat. I will see it, I'm sure, yellow as wattle in winter and brown as the grass under snow. So if we just pick apart that first line that's being presented to us, I'll follow the smell of food, fried ikan bilis, roast lamb, and mangoes. Just to give you a bit of background context on these dishes, they are types of food, obviously. But the ikan bilis is a popular dish in Singapore, where she moved to as a young child. And essentially it is dried anchovies, which is like a small type of fish. The roast lamb is a very popular dish in Anglo-European culture, especially Australian culture. It's that cultural traditional idea of, Sunday you're going to have a roast dinner. Usually it's like a roast lamb, maybe a roast pork, but usually a roast lamb. And mangoes themselves are native to Southeast Asia. So this might be in reference to her father's Chinese, Malaysian heritage. But also, in all fairness, they are quite a popular fruit in Australia as well. So maybe it's a bit of a mixture between the two. In saying that, we can see that other than the fact that these are food dishes, it's also almost symbolic, or it is symbolic, I think, of the different cultures that she has experienced. So obviously Singapore is a culture she's experienced, Australia is a culture she's experienced, and obviously that Southeast Asian culture is something she's experienced too. So we're seeing that very first line, that juxtaposition of culture through these dishes. They're put right next to each other. It's almost like listing these experiences that she's had, these experiences of potentially what could be home for her. The poet has used that olfactory imagery, which is that sense of smell, sensory language coming through there, to describe the smell of food in the very first line there. We move into our second line. We have this auditory imagery, this sound coming through, the sound of water touching on sand, stones, mud, all that natural imagery of sand, stones, mud. It's building this environment in the responder's mind. Okay, so it's very similar to Vuong Pham's poem, which we looked at a few videos ago, Mother, which also does that. If you think back to that stanza about the mother riding the scooter in the markets in Saigon, very similar. Using all these different types of sensory imagery of these foreign places to really transport us there. So Lowe continues as well with this tactile imagery, which is the idea of touch. When she's describing there, perhaps the code for entry will be in Braille. Braille obviously being the preferred method of communicating with people who are visually impaired. It's like those raised dots on paper or other surfaces that they can read and understand what's being communicated. So we've got that as well, but it's combined with that low modality term, perhaps. So it's almost she's uncertain. Perhaps the speaker has a lack of understanding, or it's like home itself is foreign to her. She still doesn't know what that is. And that's, very much supported by that top line where it says, one day I will find it. We know that she hasn't found it yet. So potentially she will one day. So this line here, it will be in my mouth a thin wafer of honey, the bitter salt taste of my husband's sweat. This is where knowing the composer really is helpful, because we're getting a lot of biblical imagery, and this entire poem is dripping in biblical allusion and biblical imagery. So it's important to know that we know that she's married a pastor. So there's very much that Christianity is going to be coming through there in terms of her identity and possibly what she considers home. So when we're talking about the thin wafer of honey, if anyone has been to a Christian communion, it's that idea, the bread of God, or the body of Christ, I think it's also referred to as. It's the bread of God God provided to the Israelites. So this idea, this thin wafer, has a symbol behind it. It's not just literally food. It's life that God has given. There is a second line underneath it. It's quite a positive. It's like a very sweet image there, thin wave of honey, very sweet. But then it's contrasted immediately to the bitter taste, the bitter salt taste of my husband's sweat. Possibly it may be in reference to the hard work her husband does. The idea of sweating is usually after hard work, you would be sweating. Possibly what he does is a heavy burden behind that. So you've got that positive and negative contrast coming through there. I just forgot one back up here, sorry, where it says, and running my fingers over 2 stone tablets. Again, there's that biblical allusion coming through, the 10 Commandments, which are written on those stone tablets. Again, this is all dripping in biblical allusion, but it is definitely, there's a strong connection there to the composer's context and the composer's identity. So yet again, the speaker there, we can pretty confidently say this is about Lo's life. Okay. Right at the bottom there, the last 2 lines. I will see it, I'm sure, yellow as wattle in winter and brown as the grass under snow. So those last 2 lines, we've got that contrasting color imagery coming through between yellow and brown. And it's also that simile and alliteration as well, the wattle in winter. But we've got that imagery coming through of that Australian wattle, very much is an Australian plant, very iconic Australian plant, versus a dead plant as well there. So it's possibly symbolic of her past culture, so her new culture in Australia versus her old culture. One is thriving, the yellow is wattle in winter, in its harsh climate winter, but yet this wattle is still living and it's thriving. Versus brown, and brown is the grass under snow. So this old culture is dying in winter, or this old plant, which, as I said, may be symbolic for her culture. Okay, we're going to move on to our next stanza here. It will be a skyscraper, 50 stories tall. It will be the smallest, most picturesque cottage. I will live there alone and with everyone I love. No children are raped there. No one eats while others go hungry. No lying awake, wondering which woman or child in what sweatshop has made these pajamas I wear, or the sheets on the bed, or the rug on the floor. I will not have to lock the door. So we've got another contrast coming through here in this very first stanza at the top between the buildings, a skyscraper, and a cottage. So there's a there's 2 very different buildings. The concept of home, this is how I'm interpreting it, could be anything to anyone. So you may live in a 50-story building and that's your home, but you also may live in, a small cottage and that might be home as well. It's possibly even a contrast between the West and East. Essentially, West is that really built up, dense population, those skyscrapers, large apartment buildings, versus the East, which usually have more of a humble home life, I suppose, in some parts anyway. Possibly. We have that anaphora coming through, which is that repetition of those words at the beginning of the line. It will be, it will be. Emphasizes the speaker's hope for home, her dream, because she doesn't know what it is yet. This is what she's thinking. That last line in that first stanza is a bit of a paradox. So we've got, I will live there alone and with everyone I love. So is she trying to say that she doesn't love anyone? Or is she trying to say that maybe the people that she loves are not actually physically there? And we're going to get into that a little bit later when we talk about her religion. So the paradox coming through, the speaker will live there alone despite being with everyone I love. And as I said, I think this might be, again, her being torn between an Eastern and Western heritage, with the skyscraper juxtaposed with the cottage. Yes. Okay. So if we go to that second stanza here, no children are raped there, no one eats while others go hungry, no lying awake, wondering which woman or child in what sweatshops has made these pajamas I wear, or the sheets on the bed, or the rug on the floor. I will not have to lock the door. So we've got a technique coming in here, and it's definitely prevalent in a couple of the other poems we've looked at. We call it cumulative listing. Cumulative, I can't say that word. Cumulative listing. So it's the idea that there's that continuous listing of ideas or words or descriptions. In this case, it's emphasizing the extent of the goods made in the Eastern world, okay? So it's almost as if as well that the Western world is taking advantage. So all these goods that are being made in a lot of these, in this case, Asian countries, the Western world profits from these. And again, it's that if we go back up to our little right-hand corner up here, this she's torn between her Eastern and Western heritage because she knows that the West has benefited from taking advantage from the East here. These little sweatshops, I'm sure you've all heard of what sweatshops are. That's what she's referencing here, okay? And by listing that, it's emphasizing how much the East has been taken advantage of by the West. So it's kind of showing us that the speaker here is trapped. Which way does she side? She doesn't know herself. Should she side with her Eastern heritage? Does she side with her Western heritage? She's torn. She's in the middle, and she doesn't feel like she belongs there. She's questioning, where is her home? Where is it? And she is saying that her home definitely will not include any of these horrific things. She doesn't want it to, okay? There's definitely a change in the actual tone itself. So it's changed from more of that loving, thoughtful tone to a very dark tone. This dark imagery is conjured through the shocking first line there. No children are raped there. It's very confronting. And there's also that anaphoric use of no at the very beginning of those first few lines. It brings that negative tone through there as well. Okay. And that last line there, I will not have to lock the door. It's almost symbolic there. The door symbolizing safety for the speaker. Wherever she goes, home for her is somewhere that will be safe. She will be safe. That's what she wants. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next stanza. And this next stanza actually is the beginning of the second part. Okay, so that very first part is her questioning what she wants home to be, where she wants home to be, what home could possibly be. She doesn't know. She's unsure. This second stanza starts with the title there, "To," without warning. So we need to pick apart, these two words here. So to me, I'm getting the idea that this is sudden and unexpected, without warning. You haven't been told. It kind of hits you out of nowhere. Okay, so she didn't plan for this. It's just happened. So we've got here the stanza. I'll read it out. An explosion of light, a word that is itself, a word to possess me, an image so bright and complete, it can only be seen with eyes shut tight, as in prayer, as in sleep, a dream that outlives reality, an image to enter me like a knife, like a nail, hammering in till it finds its reply, taking my body like breath, like the strong kiss of a bridegroom, like death in all its finality. So this is a very intense stanza, but picking it apart, it makes a bit more sense. So if we go over with the term blinding light or explosion of light, this is definitely a reference to this biblical allusion again to Christianity. So the term blinding light, or in this case explosion of light, in the Bible, usually associated with the idea of a revelation or epiphany. So you've just kind of discovered something, you just realized something. In this case, we can definitely attribute this to her kind of discovering God and discovering Christianity. This is her finding herself in God. And we know as well that she is Christian, or she is affiliated with Christianity because of who she's married to. So again, we got that biblical allusion, blinding light. I'm not sure why I keep writing blinding light. I keep meaning to say explosion of light, but either way. Blinding light, it's in reference to God. So the light is symbolic of God. And this is not just in Christianity. There are different religions which also reference their God as light, or some sort of powerful light source. So as I said, this is most likely the speaker finding religion as a way to belong, and possibly is even her version of home. So she maybe has found home, or is on the path to finding home through Christianity, through her religion and her faith. So this revelation can only be seen when she truly looks inside herself. When she says here, it can only be seen with eyes shut tight. So everything else is blocked out. She's not listening to anyone else. She's not thinking about anyone else. She's only listening to herself. Her eyes are shut tight. She's not seeing anything else. She's looking in herself. She's looking to herself in prayer. She's looking to herself in sleep. Okay? So she's finding this home, possibly even within herself. She's finding a faith within herself through Jesus, through Christ. We're seeing a lot of similes within this particular stanza, and a lot of them obviously refer to Christianity as well. And in my opinion, they indicate this sort of self-reflection. She's looking inwards to herself, and she's definitely thinking about the impact this faith has on herself and her sense of belonging. So again, we've got these biblical allusions, similes to the crucifixion of Christ. So the nails, like a nail hammering in till it finds its reply. Biblically, Christ sacrificed himself for others. He was nailed to the cross, as many of you would know. So much like she possibly needs to sacrifice her Eastern culture to embrace her Western culture. So it's again this struggle. But possibly she's referring to the fact that she needs to sacrifice her connection to Eastern culture in order to embrace Western culture, the same way that Christ sacrificed himself for our sins. Okay, we're going to move on to the next stanza now, because that was a very full-on stanza. Okay, someone is at work in me, translating this corrupt language of my body, the dark, bitter words of my heart, into the pure language of that other place, where every word is a radiant arrival that draws me across the threshold and claims me as its own. So definitely that first line there, someone is at work in me, is a reference to God. A lot of people refer to, the idea of that person inside of them that kind of drives them or that lives through them is their God. And we've got a contrast here, translating this corrupt language of my body to the dark, bitter words of my heart into the pure language, the other place where every word is a radiant arrival. So we've got that light and dark contrast coming through again. This idea of corrupt language and pure language, light and dark. Again, possibly it could be a reference to East versus West, but it's definitely, she likes to use this dichotomy. And what I mean by dichotomy is there's that, those parallels, those two opposites, okay? Light and dark in this case, corrupt and pure. So her newfound religion is almost healing the damaged parts of her, okay? That radiance, it's healing her. It's healing her bitter words of her heart, that pure language, okay? So Christianity often refers to the followers of God as a servant of God, which I found quite interesting, because when she's saying towards the end there, and claims me as its own, it's almost like she's an object to be owned now, and God owns her. She's a servant to God. Okay. So this is the individual, the speaker, becoming powerless to God as she kind of submits herself to him. And it's heavily implied towards the end of the stanza, as I've just mentioned here as well. Okay. So this whole part there, part 2, was very much about her finding religion and finding God and finding Christianity. And that has kind of helped her form her identity. And she's very heavily referenced the Bible in what she's talking about. So she's used the language of the Bible there to express her identity. So if we're finding connections between language, identity, and culture, our module, it's definitely one of the places you can talk about here, is this biblical language forming her identity. And then we go on to further to discuss how does that impact her culture, her Eastern culture. Okay. That might be something we discuss in class. Now we're going to go into the final part of the poem, a place to return to. Okay, so again, we got bed, toilet, kitchen, exposed brick walls, this worn grey carpet, toys all over the floor, reminding me that I have left the life of the mind for this. Home, the children call out in the car. We're going home. They must mean this place. So again, we've got that funny word that I hate saying, cumulative cumulative? Yeah, let's do that. Cumulative listing. It almost denotes the unimportant aspects of a physical home. Bed, toilet, kitchen, exposed brick walls. Not very inviting terms, are they? But they're, usually what people would think of would be inside of a home. She is listing them almost as if they're unimportant aspects of a physical home. She has learned that home is much more beyond the physical realm. And this is emphasized, I think, through the dull color imagery she's got there. This worn grey carpet. It's not inviting. Toys all over the floor. It's a mess. It's not appealing. After that really intense stanza we just had, or the two stanzas we had before, she's talking about this power of God, this power of, belonging, and this maybe finding a home through Christianity. And we come back to this. It's not exciting. We've got direct speech there of the children, who I'm assuming is the children of the speaker. So direct speech of the children captures the children's excitement. This is contrasted with her detachment to home. So the children are excited to be going home, to come back to this place, but she's not. There's no excitement here. There's almost like a resentment towards this place. So overall, this stanza indicates the speaker's disconnection with this physical place. She doesn't feel at home here. She doesn't feel connected to this physical place. Okay, and that kind of goes back to our discussion at the very beginning of the poem when we were talking about the title, home, and the fact that it doesn't necessarily have to be a physical place. It can be something beyond the physical realm. Okay, we're going to move on to the next stanza now. Next two stanzas, I should say. I consider my father born into a single room that housed his whole family, and this running water, 6 sets of taps, a fridge, a washing machine, enough books for a dowager empress or medieval king. If there must be a place, a tent for the body on this earth, I'll take this one. With the blue plumbago waving defiantly through the natives, the climbing white jasmine rampant over the fence, and the mulberry tree, that foreigner so completely at home, growing taller each year. So again, there's this time shift that's happened there, and she's reflecting now. Reflective thoughts are coming through here. She's considering what's happened in the past, her father, and what he had to go through, and what his idea of home was, where he was born. And it's allowing opportunity for her to reflect on what she might consider a home as well. So we're definitely seeing a contrast there between the East and the West. What materials the East need versus what the West need in their home in order to feel at home. It's almost this excessive nature. She's saying her father was born into a single room that housed his whole family, so everyone was crammed in this room. And in this Western home, there's running water, 6 sets of taps, a fridge, washing machine, enough books for a dowager empress, medieval king. It's a hyperbolic description, and again, it's cumulative listing, but that hyperbolic description shows the excessive nature of the West, this unneeded opulence. There's too much stuff. You don't need all of this. This materialism doesn't make a person belong. You don't belong to a physical thing. You can't fill a house full of things and think that's where someone belongs. That's what she's arguing here. Doesn't matter how many things you have. If we move into our last stanza there, just a bit of context for you. Blue plumbago is native to South Africa. It's like a flower. Jasmine plants are native to Australia and the oceanic region. So it's usually in like the, they're all over really, but definitely they're in Australia, oceanic region. I think parts of Southeast Asia as well. But mulberry trees are typically native to Asia. Okay. So we've got a lot of natural imagery in this final stanza here. Some say it's botanical imagery, like the Botanic Gardens. I say natural imagery either way. So you've got a lot of natural imagery coming through there of the plants, which I think represents the foreigner. A foreigner can live and flourish in a foreign land. You've got the South African blue plumbago, you've got the mulberry trees, and then obviously you've got the jasmine plants there. It's almost like very, very similar to that very first line we looked at where she was talking about the 3 different food dishes and how those 3 kind of were together. It's the same here, but instead of using food to represent culture. She's using plants to represent culture. And the fact that these are all, thriving together in this land. Even the South African plant, the blue plumbago, it's waving defiantly through the native. It's saying, I'm here. I don't care if you don't want me here. I'm going to blossom. I'm going to shine. Like I'm going to flourish. It's a foreigner that can live and flourish in a foreign land. So, as I said, I think the plants are symbolic of different cultures. These cultures flourish and blossom in all different homes. And perhaps even the mulberry trees, it says mulberry trees are typically native to Asia. Perhaps the mulberry tree is symbolic for the speaker. So she has that Asian heritage. She is becoming stronger in her home. So even though that she's conflicted and she has this idea of, do I belong here? I've got this Asian heritage, but I've got this Western heritage too. Do I belong here? You're saying there that the mulberry tree, that foreigner so completely at home, is growing taller each year. That she can belong in a foreign land. It's a very hopeful ending. That maybe it is possible to feel home with contrasting heritage, regardless of the fact that she's trapped between the two, regardless of the fact that she's got this Eastern heritage, but these Western values, especially this Christian value, she can belong here. Okay, so that brings us up to the end of that poem, and that brings us up to the final poem that you have to study for this particular module. So as I said, please make sure that you have a very comprehensive annotation of the poem. Feel free to go and do your own research as well on top of this. We will be discussing the poem in depth in class. So please make sure you bring your annotations, your notes, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Thank you so much. Goodbye.